All right, students, welcome back. We were looking at citizenship. We highlighted who a citizen is. We looked at the ways of acquiring citizenship. We looked at the qualifications for, or the conditions that need to be met or satisfied to get citizenship by naturalization. And then we looked at the ways of actually losing citizenship. Then we looked at the rights of citizens, which we believe are privileges that they enjoy by virtue of being citizens. Now we want to look at the duties and obligations of a citizen. That is, what are those things that citizens owe to the state? First and foremost, citizens have the duty and obligation to pay tax. Payment of taxes. This is the government's way of recovering some of the expenses that they would have incurred while trying to meet the needs and provisions of some certain state-generated items, right? And that's why we have so many different types of taxes. We have personal income taxes, we have company income taxes, we have VAT, value-added tax, we have consumption tax, and so on and so forth. These are various taxes that go to either the state government or the federal government and are used in generating revenue for the state or the country. Citizens also have a duty to obey law. They have the duty to obey law. That's obedience of laws. Laws are put in place to be obeyed by citizens, and it is very important that citizens obey the law. Also, citizens have a duty to vote during elections. This is because if they do not vote, they do not participate in electing the leaders that will rule them. So citizens also have a duty to vote in elections. They need to exercise their constitutional duties and rights. So voting is a right as well as it is a duty. It is a right in that they are eligible to contest for it, and it is their duty because they owe it to the state to select credible leaders, which we can see a process that just ended for presidential and gubernatorial elections right here in Nigeria, where we have taken it into our hands to decide the leaders that will rule and elect us. Also, citizens have a duty to detect and prevent crime. It is not just the duty of the policeman to reduce crime rates. Citizens also have a duty or an obligation to detect and prevent crime. If you see something, you have to say something, right? So detection and prevention of crimes is one of the duties and obligations of a citizen. Also, a citizen is expected to not infringe on the rights of others. So we have non-infringement of rights of others. It's very important that you do not infringe on the rights of others, right? So you have your right to life, you have your right to security, you have your right to acquisition of property. It would be wrong for you to then trample on the rights of others just because you can. So it's very, very important that citizens not trample on the rights of others. We also have a duty to make ourselves available for enlistment, right? Citizens must have a duty to be ready for enlistment. Now you may ask me, what is enlistment? Enlistment is simply enrollment of able-bodied men and women into armed forces, Navy, Army, Air Force, and so on and so forth. In countries like Korea, when young men get to a certain age between 20 and 30, they are supposed to compulsorily go through enlistment, where they spend about 2 to 3 years serving their country in the armed forces. So it's also a very vital duty that we give back. If the citizens don't decide to be members of the armed forces, who then will protect the state? So it is important to note that citizens have the obligation to respect national symbols. We have the obligation to respect national symbols. What am I saying? It is, don't you see when the national anthem is being sung or chanted or recited, everyone is meant to be at ease or at attention. That's because we must reverence or respect the national symbols. When the pledge is being going on, you have to place your hand on your chest, your hand up, and pledge to Nigeria, our country. It is unlawful to actually defame the Nigerian flag or any flag for that matter, because it is a national symbol of that particular country. So we have that duty to respect the national symbols for a particular state, be it the pledge, the anthems, their flags, and so on and so forth. Also, citizens have a duty to respond to national service. And that is why you see that when students finish their university degree, they are meant to go on a compulsory 1-year NYSC, that is the National Youth Service Corps. Here, they have an opportunity to give back to the society that have allowed them move through the socialization process from kindergarten down to completing their degree. So we have a duty to respond to the call for national service. So respond to national service call through the NYSC or any way in which you can serve the state better. We also have a duty to be loyal to the nation. We have a duty of loyalty to the nation. And that's why we mentioned that a way you can lose your citizenship is when you become disloyal. So we have a duty and obligation to be loyal. We also have a duty to protect the state's property. We have a duty to protect state's property. That is why we are not allowed to just go about defaming roads, defaming buildings, urinating in certain places. And that's why you see where they say, do not dump, do not, these things defame or damage property. And it is the duty of every citizen to ensure that the property of the state is protected. Just as you had the liberty to use it free of charge, others should also have access to use those properties. We also have a duty to safeguard the environment. This is very, very vital, right? And that is why companies, especially those that are heavily in production, manufacturing, extraction, have a duty to ensure that they don't harm the environment, right? We have a duty to ensure that what we do safeguards the planet. That's why you see things like recycling coming up, and people are encouraged to recycle. Dump paper where paper should be dumped, dump metal where metal should be dumped, dump plastic where plastic should be dumped, just so we can safeguard the environment. And finally, we said that the duty or obligation of a citizen is to serve as a witness or a juror. We have the duty to serve as a witness or juror. So the witness part, yes, that works across board. However, we don't really operate a jury system in Nigeria, but I'll try and shed some light on it. So when I say we have a duty to serve as a witness, it's simply saying if in our presence a crime was committed and the pleading party, called the plaintiff, calls on you to serve as a witness in their case to help, get the punished criminal to pay for their crimes, it is your duty as a citizen to speak up and actually be a witness. The other way, if one needs to defend oneself and you can serve as a liable witness that, I was with this person when that happened, so definitely that person could not have been involved in that crime. It is also your duty to enforce justice in the state. And for juror, most countries' judicial system practice a jury system where before the judge makes a final decision on your case, a group of individuals who are ordinary citizens of the state, they don't even need to be legal practitioners like you and I, can serve as a preliminary judgment center where they collectively agree to decide on your case and then provide their argument to the judge, who then makes a final decision. So any citizen has a duty to serve as a juror, right? It is very, very, very important. Now, as we can see, regardless of the fact that we have some rights that we enjoy and some duties that we owe to the state, sometimes we see that these our rights can actually be trampled upon. So we then need to look at how do we ensure that citizens' rights are safeguarded? Ways of safeguarding citizens' rights. What are the mechanisms put in place to ensure that the rights of citizens are not trampled upon? The first one is the supremacy and existence of rule of law. What is rule of law? Recall we've looked at this concept of rule of law and supremacy as a notion in which no individual is above the law. The rule of law is a box that ensures that people remain constitutional and to curtail the actions of certain individuals who wish to harm, hurt, or destroy. Now, where the supremacy and the rule of law exists, the rights of individuals, of citizens, are better safeguarded. This is because when you know that your actions or misactions will be subject to judgment of a particular law, and that law is binding, it helps curtail actions of people who might try to restrict your rights. So it is very important that there is a rule of law. As important as the rule of law is, it is useless without an independent judiciary. And that's why we said an independent judiciary is also a way of safeguarding citizens' rights. Remember, we mentioned when we looked at the arms of government, we said the judiciary is the last hope of the common man. Now, if the last hope of the common man is partial, is biased, there's no way that judgment will be served equitably. Fairness will not exist. And that is why we said to safeguard citizens' rights, the judicial system must be independent. Also, a way to safeguard your rights is by practicing democracy. We see how democratic institutions are all about freedom and liberty. When you look at systems of government like totalitarianism and fascism, we can't see the rights of individuals being safeguarded there. And that's why we said democracy, practicing democracy as a system of government helps to safeguard citizens' rights. Similarly, entrenching these rights in the Constitution also increases the chances of serving as a safeguard against the rights infringement. So when the rights of individuals are entrenched in the Constitution, just like fundamental human rights are, we see how it safeguards the rights of the people. The rule book contains it, therefore you can't go against it. So, entrenchment in the Constitution. Also, the enlightenment programs to enlighten or create awareness on the need to respect rights and even on the rights that individuals have would also go a long way. A lot of helps do not know that they have no right to be forced into slavery or labor, like forced labor. Like no one has the right to force you into labor or into slavery. However, without proper enlightenment programs in very low-income areas where there's much more poverty or low education, we see that people are not even aware of the rights they have and therefore cannot take necessary steps to safeguard it. So we see how important enlightenment programs are. Also, when you go around to these neighborhoods and explain the consequences of infringing people's rights, even the criminals start to see that there are consequences of their actions, bad actions, and then would want to change to ensure that the rights of others are safeguarded. Another reason how or why, or another way in which the rights of citizens could be safeguarded is by enforcing free press. If there is no free press, which we tie this to freedom of expression, how then can the rights of the people be popularized nationwide? You see, one major feature of a totalist system, like a totalitarian system, is the fact that the rulers actually control the media. Therefore, if the media cannot even tell people the rights that they have and the means at which they can secure their rights, then it means that the people would always have their rights alienated. Their rights could be disenfranchised. And that's why we see the role that the media plays, the press plays, in helping people understand the rights that they have. Also, another way to safeguard citizens' rights is by putting infrastructures in place like the Human Rights Commission. So the existence of the Human Rights Commission helps citizens have a place to go when their rights are being infringed upon. So we have things like the Ombudsman, which is the Public Complaints Commission, where people can actually go to and lay complaints on things that affect them. Also, to safeguard citizens' rights, whatever system of government in place, the state has to accommodate pressure groups. So accommodation of pressure groups help to safeguard rights. Pressure groups are usually a group of people empowered with what? The means to dictate their wants to the government and actually get those wants solved. It is pressure groups like, National Union of Teachers, ASU, that form a united front that can actually question the government when they see their rights being alienated. However, if these pressure groups are not accommodated, how can those rights indeed be safeguarded or even be questioned? So it's very important. Also, another way to secure or safeguard citizens' rights is by putting in place necessary systems of checks and balances. Remember, we talked about these checks and balances when we're looking at the various arms of government. The executive arm are those that enforce the law, the legislatures make the law, the judiciary implement it. However, where there is duality of positions or duplication of positions, or there are no systems of checks and balances, who then ensures that those who are responsible for safeguarding these rights don't in themselves restrict the rights of the people? And that's why we said checks and balances are very, very important. And finally, the provision of free legal aid also helps to secure or safeguard citizens' rights. Most times, there are people whose rights have been alienated. However, they don't have the funds to pursue this legally. Where there is free legal aid, where the state decides to take up their case, then we see individuals having their rights safeguarded regardless of their income class or whatever it is that limits them from pursuing it themselves. However, as much as we look for ways to safeguard citizens' rights, there are some inherent limitations to the rights that individuals have. There are ways in which citizens' rights must certainly be limited. There are some rights that you do not have, regardless of the fact that you're a human being. So let's look at some of the limitations of citizens' rights. You can start here. Limitations of citizens' rights. 1. Citizens have no right to slander or libel other citizens. So I would explain, just because you have a freedom of speech, a freedom of expression, does not mean that you will use that freedom of expression to talk down, talk ill, or spread lies about other people. And that's why we said citizens have no rights to slander or libel against other citizens. So maybe these are big words. By slander, we mean speech. And then libel, we mean written text. So no one has a right to say ill things, defamatory things, or even write them down, maybe in text or in paper, about other citizens. And this is a limitation to the freedom of expression. That's why we said these are limitations to citizens' rights. Yes, you do have a right to express yourself. However, that right of expression is limited to the point where you have no right to slander or libel another citizen. Also, conviction can limit your rights. By conviction, we mean when you have been arrested and arraigned in the court and then convicted to jail. So convicted citizens have limited rights. Yes, we agree that citizens have a right to movement. We have a freedom to movement without restriction. However, when you're imprisoned, there's a restriction to your movement. So do you see some of the ways in which the rights of an individual could be limited? When you're convicted, when you're arrested, you are confined to jail. And that means that your freedom of movement without restriction has been limited. Also, as much as you have a right to own properties, you have no right to trespass on other people's property. So, no right to trespass on other property. So it's also very important that we highlight that. You have no right to trespass on another man's property. Also, do you know that during emergency period, the rights of citizens are restricted? During emergency periods, the rights of citizens can be restricted. I would explain. Now, one of the functions of the executive, we said, was to declare a state of emergency. This means that the people in a state may be required to take in very harsh decisions to maybe control a certain general problem, which would cause the government to declare a state of emergency. And during that emergency period, a lot of rights would be restricted. For starters, right to movement, freedom of movement, even freedom of expression. Maybe they feel that there's some information going out, like maybe during the World War, right? People were not allowed to move about. They were not allowed to purchase items. Everything was on standstill, right? So that also restricts rights of people where there's emergency. Also, rights of a citizen can be restricted as a punishment for crime. As a punishment for crime. What are we saying? In most countries where an individual commits homicide, that is murder, as in the murder was contemplated and you decided to commit murder, your right to life can be restricted at that point. This is because your punishment or sentence is usually death. So we said in such a case, the right of that citizen has been restricted. Their right to life has been restricted as a punishment for a crime. They could also jail you for maybe forever, like indefinite jail term. Your freedom of movement has been restricted forever, and that is as a punishment for a crime. Also, the type of government in power can restrict citizens' rights. the type of government